The water rose so fast it drowned their laughter before they could swallow it. Marcus watched from his second floor as the HOA president clawed at his door, screaming the same words he'd sneered an hour ago. "Please. I was wrong. Let us in." Marcus Chen stood at the edge of his driveway, staring at the concrete barrier that had taken 3 contractors and $22,000 to build. The wall curved around his property like a horseshoe, rising 8 feet from the ground with reinforced steel mesh buried another 6 feet below. It wasn't pretty. Gray, industrial, brutal in its functionality. But it was engineered to withstand exactly what the geological survey had predicted: a catastrophic flood event with a probability window of 18 to 36 months. "It's hideous," Patricia Summers said, her voice carrying across the cul-de-sac with the projection of someone who'd spent 30 years in courtroom litigation before retiring to Meadowbrook Estates. She stood with her arms crossed, flanked by 4 other members of the Homeowners Association board. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a military installation." Marcus kept his expression neutral. He'd lived in this house for 7 years, ever since the divorce left him with half of everything and a determination to rebuild somewhere new. Somewhere quiet. Meadowbrook had seemed perfect, until 3 months ago when he'd read the hydrological report that the county had buried in a subsection of their climate impact assessment. "The structural engineer certified it," Marcus said. "I have all the permits." "Permits don't override our community standards," Gerald Vance said. He was the HOA president, a man who wore polo shirts in every color except ones that looked good on him. "Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our bylaws clearly states that any exterior modification must maintain aesthetic harmony with surrounding properties." "Aesthetic harmony," Marcus repeated. "Your bylaws were written in 1987. The watershed analysis that came out last year wasn't available then." Patricia stepped forward. "We've all seen your little doomsday report. The county called it a low-probability scenario. You're creating an eyesore based on paranoid speculation." "Low probability doesn't mean no probability," Marcus said. "The Blackwood River hasn't flooded in 60 years because the upstream dam has been holding. That dam is failing. The Army Corps of Engineers documented 17 critical stress fractures last inspection." "And they have a maintenance schedule," Gerald said. "Your wall violates our community character. We're voting to require its removal. You have 45 days to comply or face daily fines of $500. Marcus felt the anger rise in his chest but kept his voice level. "I'm not removing it." "Then you'll pay," Patricia said. She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd spent 3 decades making people fold under pressure. "We'll put a lien on your property. We'll take you to court. We'll make this so expensive you'll wish you'd never moved here." "Do what you have to do," Marcus said. They left in a cluster, their voices rising in indignant consensus as they walked back toward Patricia's house. Marcus stood there for another minute, looking at his wall. It wasn't beautiful, but beauty wouldn't matter when the water came. That night he sat in his kitchen with the geological survey spread across the table. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the hydrologist who'd authored the report, had been explicit in her conclusions. The Blackwood River Valley was a pressure cooker. Decades of upstream development had eliminated natural flood plains. Climate shifts had intensified rainfall patterns. The dam was a relic from an era of different weather, different understanding. When it failed, not if, but when, the water would move through the valley with the force of a tidal surge. Meadowbrook Estates sat at the valley floor. Marcus had tried to warn them. He'd gone to the HOA meeting 6 months ago with printouts of the report, with maps showing the projected flood zones. Patricia had called it fear-mongering. Gerald had suggested that Marcus was trying to damage property values. The rest of the board had voted unanimously to table the discussion and never brought it up again. So Marcus had built his wall. The fines started arriving 2 weeks later, $500 a day accumulating like compound interest. Marcus paid the first one, then stopped. Let them add up. Let them take him to court. He had documentation, expert testimony, evidence that his wall was a reasonable response to a documented threat. Any judge would see that. But the court date was set for 11 weeks out, and Marcus knew the timeline better than they did. The dam wouldn't wait for legal proceedings. He spent his evenings reinforcing the barrier, adding sandbags to the interior, checking the drainage channels he'd cut to divert overflow away from his foundation. His neighbors stopped waving. Some crossed the street when they saw him coming. One morning he found "Paranoid Freak" spray-painted across his mailbox in red letters. Marcus cleaned it off and said nothing. 3 weeks before the court date, the weather changed. The forecast started showing rain. Not scattered showers, but systems stacking up in the Pacific like planes waiting to land. Atmospheric rivers, the meteorologists called them. Columns of moisture that would dump their cargo across the watershed for days without pause. Marcus went to Gerald's house. "I'm asking you one more time," he said when Gerald opened the door. "Look at the forecast. Look at the dam reports. This is going to happen." Gerald's face was stone. "The only thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose in court and pay us $43,000 in accumulated fines plus legal fees. Go away, Marcus." The door closed. The rain started on a Tuesday morning. Light at first, almost gentle. By Wednesday it was steady, the kind of rain that didn't seem heavy but never stopped. Thursday the system stalled overhead and the precipitation turned biblical. Marcus stood at his window watching water sheet off his roof, watching the street drains struggle and then overflow. Friday morning, the emergency broadcast came through his phone at 6:15. The dam had developed a critical breach. Controlled release was no longer possible. Evacuation orders for the Blackwood River Valley were immediate and mandatory. Marcus was already dressed. He'd spent the night moving everything he cared about to the second floor. Photo albums, his daughter's artwork from when she was little, the few things that mattered beyond replacement. He'd filled bathtubs with clean water, charged every battery, prepared like he'd been preparing for months. Outside, the neighborhood was chaos. Cars jammed the streets, engines flooding in standing water. People ran through the rain with armfuls of possessions, faces blank with panic. Marcus saw Patricia loading her car with paintings, jewelry boxes, a laptop. Gerald was screaming at his wife about something, both of them soaked and frantic. The water came at 7:43. Marcus was on his second floor when he heard it, a sound like sustained thunder, like the earth itself had learned to growl. He went to the window and watched the wall of water emerge from the tree line at the end of the valley. It wasn't a wave. It was a moving mass, brown and furious, carrying trees and debris and the wreckage of everything upstream. It hit Meadowbrook Estates with the force of divine judgment. Houses folded. Cars flipped end over end like toys. The water was 8 feet deep in seconds, 10 feet, 12. Marcus watched Patricia's Mercedes disappear beneath the surface, watched Gerald's house shift on its foundation, and then crack apart as the current found the weak points. And then he watched the water hit his barrier. It surged against the concrete with a roar that shook his windows. Spray erupted 20 feet high, but the wall held. The water hit the curved surface and split, diverted around his property exactly as the engineers had calculated. His yard flooded. The wall wasn't meant to stop that, but the house stood dry on its elevated foundation. Around him, Meadowbrook Estates was drowning. Marcus saw people clinging to roofs. A woman holding a child on top of a car that was slowly sinking. A man trying to swim against the current and failing, his head going under once, twice, then disappearing. Then he saw Gerald. The HOA president was in the water up to his chest, struggling toward Marcus's house. Behind him, Patricia was clinging to a tree, her face white with terror. Gerald reached the edge of the barrier and grabbed the concrete, pulling himself along its length until he reached Marcus's driveway where the wall dipped lowest. "Marcus," he screamed, "help us, please." Marcus opened the window. Rain and wind hit his face. "You called this paranoid speculation," Marcus said. "I was wrong," Gerald's voice broke. "God, I was wrong. Please let us in. People are dying." Marcus looked past Gerald to the devastation. A man was floating face down near what used to be the community pool. A roof had collapsed with people still on it. The water was still rising. "How many people laughed at my wall?" Marcus asked. "Marcus, please." "How many people called me a freak? How many people signed off on those fines?" "We were stupid. We were blind. I'm sorry. Just please." Gerald's words dissolved into sobbing. "My wife is in there. She's trapped in the attic. I can't get to her. Please." Marcus closed his eyes, opened them. "Get everyone you can to the east side of my wall," he said. "There's a ladder in my garage. I'm coming down." He spent the next 4 hours pulling people from the water. Gerald, Patricia, whose expensive litigation skills meant nothing against the current, families with children, elderly couples who couldn't swim. He set up the ladder against the interior of his wall, and one by one they climbed to safety on his second floor. 47 people crowded into his house by the time the water stopped rising. Gerald's wife wasn't among them. Neither were 6 other residents whose names Marcus learned later from the list of the dead. The water had taken them before anyone could reach them. Marcus stood in his living room, surrounded by the people who'd mocked him, fined him, spray-painted his mailbox. They sat on his floors wrapped in his blankets, drinking water he'd stored, eating food from his emergency supplies. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Patricia finally broke the silence. She was sitting against the wall, mascara streaked down her face, her hair matted and filthy. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "You tried to tell us." Marcus didn't answer. He was looking out the window at what remained of Meadowbrook Estates. The water was starting to recede, leaving behind a landscape of destruction so complete it looked like a war zone. Houses reduced to foundations. Cars crushed against trees. A boat from someone's garage embedded in what used to be the community center. His wall stood intact, concrete and ugly and absolutely essential. Gerald came to stand beside him. The man looked like he'd aged 20 years in a single day. "The fines," Gerald said. "We'll cancel them, the lawsuit, everything." He paused. "It doesn't mean anything now, does it?" "No," Marcus said. "It doesn't." "My wife," Gerald's voice broke. "She told me this morning. She said maybe you were right. Maybe we should build something. I told her we didn't have time, that we needed to evacuate first." He wiped his eyes. "We never got the chance." Marcus put a hand on Gerald's shoulder. They stood there in silence, 2 men who'd been enemies hours ago, united now by catastrophe and loss. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The National Guard arrived on the 3rd day, boats navigating through streets that had become canals. They evacuated the survivors from Marcus's house in groups, ferrying them to emergency shelters on higher ground where FEMA had set up operations. The water had receded enough to walk through, but the damage was irreversible. Marcus stayed behind. This was still his home, and the wall had proved its worth. While engineers assessed the destruction, while insurance adjusters photographed the wreckage, while news crews filmed footage of the disaster that would run on national broadcasts for weeks, Marcus began the work of recovery. The county sent a structural inspector named David Torres to assess Marcus's property. He spent 3 hours examining the wall, taking measurements, studying the engineering specifications that Marcus provided. "This is exceptional work," Torres said, running his hand along the concrete. "The deflection design, the foundation depth, whoever engineered this knew exactly what they were doing." "I hired the best," Marcus said. "Cost me everything I had in savings." Torres looked at the ruins of the neighborhood beyond the wall. "You saved 47 people. That's 47 families who aren't planning funerals right now. 7 didn't make it, Marcus said. 7 that might have survived if people had listened. You can't carry that weight, Torres said. You warned them. You showed them the evidence. What happened after that, that's on them, not you. But Marcus did carry it. He carried it through the weeks that followed, as Meadowbrook Estates transformed from a disaster zone to a reconstruction site. The dead were buried. The missing were declared presumed dead. The survivors scattered to temporary housing across 3 counties, their lives disrupted in ways that would take years to untangle. The media found Marcus's story. Local news first, then regional, then national. The man who built a wall and saved his neighbors became a headline that ran in variations across every platform. Reporters wanted interviews. Documentary filmmakers wanted access. A publisher offered an advance for a book he had no interest in writing. Marcus refused them all. What he did accept was the meeting that came 6 weeks after the flood. The county commissioner, a woman named Helen Briggs, drove out to see him personally. "We failed this community," she said, standing in Marcus's kitchen. "The hydrological report existed. We knew the dam was compromised. We chose to prioritize other concerns." "People died because of that choice," Marcus said. "Yes," Helen met his eyes without flinching. 7 people died. Hundreds more lost everything they owned. That's a failure we'll have to answer for. What are you going to do about it? Helen opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. The county is creating a new position, Director of Flood Preparedness and Infrastructure Resilience. We want someone who understands the science, who won't be swayed by political pressure or budget concerns, who will tell the truth even when people don't want to hear it. She slid the document across the table. "We want you." Marcus stared at the job description. 6-figure salary, authority to mandate protective infrastructure across the entire county, direct line to the emergency management director. "Why would I trust the same government that buried the report in the first place?" he asked. "Because we're giving you the power to make sure it never happens again," Helen said. "You'll have final approval on all development in flood risk zones. You'll control the budget for dam maintenance and upgrades. You'll have legal authority to override local HOAs when public safety is at stake." She paused. "You tried to save this neighborhood and they fought you. Now you can save the next one and they won't have a choice." Marcus read through the document again. The scope was enormous. 12 communities in the watershed. 37 identified high-risk zones. Infrastructure needs estimated at $40 million over the next decade. "I'll need full engineering staff," he said. "Real experts, not county nephews with political connections." "Done." "I'll need authority to condemn properties if necessary." "You'll have it." "And I want Sarah Okonkwo as my chief hydrologist. She wrote the report you buried. She deserves to see her work actually implemented." Helen smiled. "I already called her. She accepted pending your approval." Marcus signed the contract that afternoon. The transformation started immediately. Marcus assembled a team of 12 specialist engineers, hydrologists, climate scientists, emergency planners. They began systematic assessments of every vulnerable area in the county, using the Meadowbrook disaster as the baseline for what could happen when warnings were ignored. The first battle came in Riverside Heights, a development similar to Meadowbrook but with twice as many homes. Marcus presented his findings to their HOA. They needed flood barriers, elevated foundations, enhanced drainage systems. The cost would be $8 million, split between county funding and special assessments on the homeowners. The HOA president, a real estate developer named Richard Moss, fought back hard. He hired lawyers, challenged the engineering reports, accused Marcus of fear-mongering. The accusations sounded familiar. Marcus brought the Meadowbrook survivors to the public hearing. Patricia Summers testified first. She described watching her house disintegrate. described the sound of people screaming in the water, described the guilt of being alive when her neighbor's children weren't. Gerald Vance went next. He brought a photo of his wife, held it up for the crowd to see, talked about the last words she'd said to him, about how he'd told her they didn't have time to protect their home, about how he'd been wrong. One by one, the survivors spoke. No dramatics, no exaggeration. Just the plain truth of what happens when you ignore expertise because it's inconvenient or expensive or ugly. The Riverside Heights HOA voted unanimously to approve the protective infrastructure. The pattern repeated across the county. Some communities accepted Marcus's recommendations immediately. Others fought until he showed them what fighting had cost Meadowbrook. Within 8 months, every high-risk zone had approved protective measures. Within 18 months, construction was underway on all of them. Marcus worked 70-hour weeks. He reviewed engineering plans, inspected construction sites, testified at county commission meetings, fought budget battles with commissioners who thought $40 million was too expensive, until he reminded them that 7 funerals cost more than money. Sarah Okonkwo became his closest ally. Her hydrological models predicted the next vulnerable areas, tracked upstream development, calculated probability windows for future flood events. She was brilliant and relentless and completely uninterested in making her findings palatable to people who didn't want to hear them. "The Blackwood Dam is stabilized," she told Marcus one afternoon in his office, "but we have 3 other dams in similar condition. The county needs to face reality. We're looking at a cascade scenario within 5 years." How many communities at risk? 47, population of about 19,000. Marcus leaned back in his chair. 19,000 people, 47 communities. The scale was overwhelming, but so was the alternative. "Write the proposal," he said. "Full dam replacement for all 3. I'll take it to the commission." The proposal cost $95 million. The county commission nearly revolted. 2 commissioners called it fiscal insanity. One suggested that Marcus was exaggerating the risk to justify his department's existence. Marcus brought aerial footage of Meadowbrook Estates before and after. He played it on the projection screen in the commission chambers. Houses, families, lives. Then water, destruction, death. "That's what 95 million prevents," he said. "The question is whether you value money more than the people who elected you." The vote passed 7-2. The work consumed 3 years of Marcus's life, 3 years of engineering reviews and public hearings and midnight inspections, 3 years of fighting bureaucracy and political resistance and budget constraints. But at the end of it, the county's flood infrastructure was transformed. New dams, reinforced levees, protective barriers around every vulnerable community, early warning systems with redundant communication networks, evacuation protocols that actually worked. The test came in year 4. Another atmospheric river stalled over the watershed, another week of relentless rain. The new dams held, but the water had to go somewhere. It poured through the valley in volumes that exceeded even Sarah's models. Marcus spent 72 hours in the Emergency Operations Center, coordinating evacuations, monitoring water levels, making real-time decisions about which barriers to reinforce and which roads to close. The protective infrastructure he'd built was stressed to its limits. Riverside Heights flooded to 3 feet in some areas, but the barriers kept the water out of homes. Creek Valley estates stayed completely dry behind their new levees. Oakmont lost power for 2 days, but not a single structure. 0 deaths, 0 missing persons. Property damage less than $2 million, mostly vehicles that weren't moved in time. The media called it a miracle. Marcus called it engineering. He went back to Meadowbrook Estates when the crisis passed. The neighborhood had been rebuilt, though half the lots remained empty. The people who'd returned had built differently, elevated foundations, flood-resistant materials, emergency supplies. They'd learned. Patricia Summers had moved away, unable to live with the memories. But Gerald Vance had stayed. He'd built a new house on his old lot, this one elevated 12 feet above grade with breakaway walls on the ground level. He saw Marcus's truck and came outside. "I heard about Riverside Heights," Gerald said. 3 feet of water and not a single injury. "The barriers worked," Marcus said. "Because you built them, because you made people listen." Gerald paused. "My daughter asked me about the flood yesterday. She's 8, doesn't really remember it. I didn't know what to tell her." "Tell her the truth," Marcus said. "Tell her what happens when people ignore experts. Tell her what happens when they listen." Gerald nodded slowly. He looked at Marcus's wall, still standing, still ugly, still absolutely necessary. "We put up a memorial," Gerald said. "For the 7, down by where the community center used to be. Your name's on it." "I didn't want my name on anything." "It says you tried to warn us. It says we didn't listen. It says 7 people died because we chose pride over prudence." Gerald's voice was steady. "My wife's name is there, next to yours. I wanted people to remember both. The man who tried to save us and the cost of not listening." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He stood there in silence, looking at the memorial he couldn't see from where he stood, thinking about the lives that ended and the ones that continued. "The county offered me a promotion," he finally said. "Regional director, 4 counties instead of 1. You taking it?" "Good," Gerald extended his hand. "Save more people, Marcus. Make them listen, even when they don't want to, especially then." They shook hands, 2 men who'd learned the hardest possible lesson about the cost of ignorance and the value of expertise. Marcus drove away from Meadowbrook Estates as the sun set behind the mountains. His wall stood in his rearview mirror, concrete and ugly and life-saving. Around it, a neighborhood rebuilt itself with wisdom purchased in blood and water. He thought about the next 4 counties, about the vulnerable communities that didn't know they were vulnerable, about the dams and levees and barriers that needed to be built before the next atmospheric river came. The work would never end, but neither would the memory of what happened when someone failed to do it. Marcus turned onto the highway, heading toward meetings and plans and battles yet to be fought. Behind him, the memorial stood in the evening light, bearing 7 names and 1 truth. Some walls are worth building, some voices are worth hearing, and some lessons can only be learned when it's already too late.